Morning, church. How we doing? You good? You look a little sleepier than first service, which makes no sense because you got to sleep in. So it's time to wake up. We're here. It's good to be in church this morning. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Benji, and I'm on the teaching team here at Icon, and it's going to be a fun morning together. If you've been with us the last month, you know we've been in a series called Just My Type. If you're just joining us, awesome Sunday to be here. As we conclude this series, that's why we have the couch up here and everything. We're going to have a special conversation, and I'll introduce our special guests here in a second. But the last 3 weeks, here's what we've done, is we wanted to explore how we're wired and how the people around us are wired, kind of the filter that we see the world through. And we wanted to look at like us, God, and then also the Enneagram, because we think the Enneagram can be a really helpful tool to sort of unpacking the way we're wired and the way that others are wired around us. And so we're going to have a conversation around that as we conclude this series. But I remember back to when we were planning kind of this whole year's worth of sermon series, and we talked about what would it look like to do this series and have a conversation around God, the Enneagram, and you. And I think there's a verse that really sums up our mission and vision and heart for this series. And so I want to read that for you today as we begin. It's Psalm 139, verse 13 through 16, and it says this will be on the screen. Oh yes, you shaped me first, inside then out. You formed me in my mother's womb. I thank you, high God, you're breathtaking. Body and soul, I am marvelously made. I worship in adoration. What a creation. You know me inside and out. You know every bone in my body. You know exactly how I was made, bit by bit, how I was sculpted from nothing into something. Like an open book, you watched me grow from conception to birth. All the stages of my life were spread out before you. The days of my life all prepared before I'd ever lived one day. And here's the thing. Is it's so important for us as believers, as Christians in the room this morning, if you'd call yourself a Christian, to go, I want to do the hard work, the deep work of soul exploration. I want to understand the way that I see life, because as I better understand the way I'm wired, I can also better interact with the people around me. And as I better understand how they're wired and the lens they see the world through, we can have more empathy for each other, more sympathy for one another, and I believe, just as our mission as Icon Church is to help people become more like Jesus, this is one of the ways we do that. And so we want to use this tool of the Enneagram. First week in this series, we took some time to discuss all 9 types. If you're unaware of the 9 types, the conversation this morning will still be insightful for you. So week 2, we talked about how does this work in our relationships? As we interact with each other, what does that look like? And then last week, we talked about kind of that shadow. What happens when we have some blind spots, and how does that maybe affect our vantage point and perspective? And so today, what we decided to do as a conclusion to the Just My Type series is we decided to bring in some specialists on the Enneagram. And so today, I'm excited to introduce to you Rick and Leslie Bradstreet. They're certified Enneagram teachers. They're also certified for the Enneagram in business, and I'll let them talk more about what they do, but they're based up in Austin. And so would you do this with me? Would you give Rick and Leslie a nice, awesome, Icon, warm welcome as they head up on to the stage this morning? Awesome. Well, it's going to be a good conversation, and I guess as we dive in, Rick and Leslie, would you just give people a little bit of context of maybe when you discovered the Enneagram, and then 2, like what numbers you are and what you do now with the Enneagram?
Well, we discovered the Enneagram back in 97, and
before dirt?
It's been a while.
It's been a while. Through I think it was at another church in Austin, at the Church of Conscious Harmony, they talked about it, and then Rick went to a workshop in Phoenix, and that was all we needed. We were off and running.
Yeah.
And did you ask about what we're doing with it, or what?
Yeah, what you do with it now. I mean, you could speak to you and let Rick speak to him. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a type 7 on the Enneagram, and if there are any 7s in the room, you know
you're the best type.
The party type.
You know they don't stick to anything for 22 years. But for some reason, I am still up to my elbows in Enneagram work. I've been studying it ever since then, I've never stopped learning. It is, we talk about it almost every day of our lives in some form or fashion, and we continue to learn about it, and I am still just in conversations with various types and in workshops that I go to, still learning, and I don't think I'll ever stop doing that, and both about myself and about the system as well.
For sure.
What she said. Plus, it's been, in our marriage, it's been spectacular learning about Leslie and learning how my style both compliments and irritates the fire out of her. And so it's been a wonderful tool for us to become more intimate in terms of knowing each other and giving each other both humor and space to be different,
Yeah. How has that worked for you, like what you do now? Speak to that a little bit.
So my profession is I'm a psychologist, and I work 25 years in the police department here in Austin. And so I use it with police. I use it, I do counseling for couples and groups, and then we do some teaching with other groups like leadership training and so forth. So and Leslie and I teach a couple of evenings a month for study groups for people who are interested in the Enneagram. So we're using it all the time in all these different settings. And it really makes life richer and easier. Yeah.
So I'm a lot newer to the Enneagram. I'm a type 3, and it was probably I know for sure, it was April of 2018 was the second time I took the Enneagram and began to dive into it. What I noticed for me was there was just there was habits that I had that were recurring that I was going, there has to be more behind this. I'd love to do some deeper kind of soul work on this. And I journaled about it, and then I became obsessed with it. And so having this conversation, I feel very lucky to get to talk to you guys, because I think the soul work aspect of the Enneagram is so important to have conversations around this. So let's do this, because there are people in here that may have never even taken the Enneagram. They don't even know what number they are. That's fine. But maybe define for us quickly, what would you say about the Enneagram, and how does it differ from other personality tests and typing systems?
So we've studied a lot of different systems, and Rick will tell you he's used the Myers-Briggs for many, many years. The thing that we love about the Enneagram that's different than any other system we've worked with is that it's both deeper and broader.
Yeah.
Most systems talk about your behavior and what you do and how you look outside. The Enneagram talks more about your motivations, what's underneath the behavior and what's driving that behavior and what's causing me to do the things I do and react the way I react to what comes at me.
Yeah.
And as we were saying earlier, a lot of times two different types can look a whole lot alike. They have the same behaviors, and the 3 and the 7 have very similar behaviors, but if you start drilling down to why Benji did that thing that he did and why I did the same thing, you're going to get completely different answers. And that's where the gold is to figure out what is this really about for me, not to change the behavior, but to shift something on the inside so that I understand it.
That's good.
The other thing is that all of us, particularly in this culture, are working really hard to polish off our rough edges and look good and be successful. And so this gives us an opportunity to go, you know what, there's other parts of me, and we'll be talking, I guess, about this later, that aren't as pretty to me, but they're just as much a part of me as the part that I've polished up. And so it's really a chance to relax and get to know ourselves in every aspect and be comfortable with that, which is wonderful. It's freedom.
Yeah. And it's so important for us to know, again, the way that we're wired, because then we can actually choose to do some of the work. What would you say to people in the room that maybe are more skeptical, or they're like, okay, so you're going to give me a number, and then it's going to box me in, and then everybody's going to be like, oh, that's totally a 9 thing to do, right? Like people that you just, I don't want to be boxed in, right? So what would you say to someone who's kind of skeptical on that side?
Right, so none of us want to be boxed in. And if you lined up, so Benji's a 3, so we had 5 3s in front of the room. They would all look different, they would talk different, and they would really be unique. Everybody is unique, but they have the same motivation, the 5 of them, even though they express it differently and have their own lives that are very different. So it's not being boxed in. In fact, our type actually boxes us in because it provides a way of acting and thinking and responding to situations without us having to think about it. But we're stuck with that one style. And so that's why we have kind of conflicts in marriages and between parents and kids, because you've got two separate styles operating, and there's just a miss. They don't communicate well because they're operating on different assumptions. So the type becomes a box if you don't know it. Now, if you know it, then you have the freedom to choose to change your response to things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're stuck with your type.
Yeah, it's funny how it's actually opposite, right? So like once you know your number, then you start to do sort of that deeper work, and then you unpack and you can choose to take a different path or different course if needed. Okay, so let's just quickly identify some common misconceptions. First one being, can I be a 4 yesterday and a 2 tomorrow?
You're never going to outgrow your type or change your type.
Yeah.
Some people will say, yeah, I don't want to do that 4 stuff anymore, so I'm going to become a 6. That's higher, right? On the Enneagram? It's not. No one type is better or worse than any other type.
Yep.
And once that type structure is locked into place, it's there for life. And we aren't going to get rid of it. And for that matter, we don't want to get rid of it. That type is there for a very good reason. It serves us very well in the world and helps us to get through a lot of painful situations that would be too much, would be too overwhelming for us otherwise. But we do have connections to other types. As a 7, I've got a 6 on one side and an 8 on the other, so those are my wings. I'll have influences from both of those, so I might think to myself, in some part of my life, I may act more like a 6 or more like an 8. And then the arrow points, the stress and what you used to call stress and security points, we've changed that, by the way, I also have influence from those. So I've got actually direct access to 5 types.
It's unconscious, but that's what a lot of
Yeah,
access.
they're all unconscious. They're all unconscious. I go there unconsciously. So I'm going to feel those, and you're going to see aspects of those in me. So I've got to just get to know myself a little bit and do some self-observation in order to really suss out which one is my core.
And that, again, that speaks to the movement within the Enneagram, that there's more to you than just this one thing. And we were joking before service, after years and years of working on this since the 90s, you guys are going, there's still so much new that I'm learning. I think that speaks to that, because when you go, okay, yes, I am a whatever number you are, you're an 8, so you have your 7 and your 9 wing, but then there's all these ways that actually fleshes out in your life and makes you unique in the way that you're seeing things in your perspective. And so let's do this. I think coming out of a question like that, I want to rewind to like the beginning of someone's life. How early do you see this? So like for parents in the room, should they be like, oh, my kid's totally a 6? Like, should we be even saying that? Like, is that smart? When do you start to maybe see signs?
You'll be tempted to say that.
You know, there's that whole question of, is it nature or nurture or some combination? Yeah, I think we each come out of the womb with some pre-inklings towards, I don't know, who knows? There's no rule on this, is the thing.
Yeah.
We have some predispositions. Then we meet our world and find out that it's a pretty painful place. And so we develop our coping mechanisms and our style. And so in some way, and I think it's different for every single person, but there's some combination of that. The theory says that the type is pretty much locked in around the age of 7, which is also, I think they call it the age of reason. So that's, a moving target. It's más o menos, but somewhere around that age, our type structure gets locked in, and we can identify it, maybe. I think most of us probably, if we watch our kids pretty carefully and ask them questions, can probably pretty much suss it out, but I wouldn't take it to the bank, because there's a lot of stuff going on in kids' lives as they grow, and different influences come in, and things happen at school and so forth. But I think we can start talking to them about it and teaching them to be aware of what's going on inside and what was going on when you reacted that way to your little brother or
when your friend dissed you or whatever happened.
Yeah, and just start them to do some self-examination with or without naming it. I don't think we have to name it.
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful for kids to start looking at that and questioning that and,
Yep.
and getting familiar with what really is happening for me.
Okay, so you're a 7 and a 2 together. What are your kids? What numbers are they?
We have 5 between us.
Okay.
We have, get this, we have identical twins that are an 8 and a 4. The 2 most intense types on the Enneagram.
Yeah.
I was telling somebody earlier, I was just glad I wasn't. They're his. I wasn't there to raise them as teenagers. I am so grateful.
So they're twins, and I adopted them, and so I got to know them when they were 6. And I'm a go along to get along guy. I want to be friends. I don't want to have conflict. And both my daughters, 4 and 8, love to have conflict. And so I was looking at them fighting when I first arrived, and I didn't know what to do. It's like, how do I make any sense of this? And then all of a sudden they're done fighting and they're happy. And I had no way to understand.
Wow.
Usually.
And their stepsister's a 9.
Okay.
That makes
Interesting.
perfect sense.
Yeah.
My boys are 6 and 9.
Okay, cool. What do you think it's helpful, like when they are really young, to actually outwardly tell them their number, or do we just use the wisdom in how we interact with those kids? Like, what did you?
I'd vote for B.
Okay.
Just know your use your own wisdom about it, as opposed to trying to force it on them, because it'll come or not. Be talking about it. Use it with your spouse, because that'll make a huge difference in how you raise the kids. And so
Yeah, that's good. One thing that we talked about earlier this week, as we were just on the phone getting to know each other a little bit, is we started having a conversation around blind spots. And what I'd love to do, because I realize some of you are maybe very new to this whole thing and you're going, they're talking about 9s and 7s and 4s, like what are they talking about? Yeah, that's fine. I think when we start talking about blind spots, we can all identify there are areas of our lives, whether we choose to knowingly ignore them and just like give them the stiff arm and not talk about it, or if it's something maybe we aren't aware of. We all know we have blind spots. So speak to first how the Enneagram helps with that a little bit. And we've talked about 2s and 7s and 3s quite a bit. Can we talk about some of those other numbers and how, like maybe their blind spots, how they identify them?
Yeah. Excuse me. And Kelly mentioned this last week, and that was great, a great place to start. First of all, let me just add one caveat to that.
Yeah.
Every Enneagram style has huge gifts.
Yeah.
Both for personally and for the world. So there's that. So sometimes we talk so much about the dark side of it that we forget what we do bring. But one of the things about our blind spots is that when we overuse our gifts, they become a liability.
Yep.
So for me, as a 7, this high energy and positiveness, but it can drive you a little crazy with it. It can become manic and sort of frenzied.
Yep.
And not be useful at all.
Yep.
So that's just one example. So in terms of the blind spots, we also believe that, if you put them out under the light of day and look at them, they start to lose some of their power over us, because we can get familiar with them and we find out that they're not really that bad. So to start with my triad, which is the head triad, I'm a head type, 5, 6, and 7. The type 5 blind spot, or the emotional habit. I'll talk about it in terms of emotional habit. 5s believe that the world is an intrusive place. People are intrusive, and they tend to pull in, and I call it a plexiglass shield. Put a little plexiglass shield around them so we can't get too close. We can't get at them. We can't suck them dry of all their resources, their time, their right.
if you're a 5, you'll know what that experience is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they tend to just pull in and detach from the world, from the people in it, and so they're missing and they're in process of that. Just a side note, they're detaching from their receptivity to grace, to God, in that same motion. So, so theirs is what I would call hoarding the resources, pulling in and circling the wagons, and so oftentimes isolating themselves. And the 6s, their emotional habit is fear, and you 6s in the room know that they become very vigilant. They're scanning everything's scanning, what's danger, what's going to happen, what's going to go wrong, who can I trust, who can't I trust. And so and that's also up in the head, and they get so wrapped up in that they can't relax into the safety and security of the people around them. And
That gives the sixes the best BS detectors on the planet.
That's awesome.
yeah. And did we talk about seven? We already talked about seven.
Talk about the nines a little bit.
The nines. Okay.
They're an interesting type.
Nines are an interesting.
Talking about Kelly now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So their habit is basically, we call it narcotization, but it's really of going to sleep to themselves. So what happens is they're so, their attention goes to harmony. They want harmony in the world, harmony between people, and they're so conflict avoidant that they will do anything to create harmony. And in that process, excuse me, they sort of lose sight of their own priorities, their own agendas, their own preferences to merge with other people, to merge with the world and make sure that you're happy and you're happy and you're happy.
So it's a huge gift to the world, but they're neglecting themselves.
So, yeah, so, I lost my train of thought. So the belief is, the unconscious belief, way down deep is, if I show up for who I am and say what I want, you're going to kick me to the curb. I'm going to create conflict, and you're going to kick me to the curb, and then here I'll be, all by myself.
Interesting.
So these blind spots are pretty scary. I mean, seriously, for all of us.
It's a black hole.
Yeah,
It's a
so
black
we
hole.
seriously avoid them, and that's one of the things. If you can, that's the journey to befriend our blind spots, and then they're no longer scary. It's like making the world safer for ourselves.
And this is why I think it's so important, is because even if you've never even taken the test, or you don't know what number you are, or you're just getting started on the journey, when we start to be more willing to address these things, it changes how we show up in the world. And we can show up as our best version when we're aware of our potential blind spots. I can be aware of where I move in certain moments. Like, I resonate with you nines in the room a lot in moments when I feel very worn down or worn out, because I feel this want to just sit and not offend anyone and not show up at up here level, because I would rather just keep the peace in certain moments. It feels safer. And so there's these ways that we begin to realize we can resonate with other numbers, and it creates deeper levels of friendship and that sort of thing. I think addressing blind spots is huge in your marriage as well, obviously. Anything else you want to say on blind spots?
I want to add that what happens when these habits come up, and they really are habits, and you can feel it in your body if you start to pay attention. When for me, it's gluttony. It's like, I want it all.
Yeah.
I want to taste it all, sample it all. I can feel that energy come up. But what happens is it cuts me off. And I'm not connecting with other people. I'm not receptive to grace. I'm not connecting with myself. And I'm not present.
Wow.
I'm not present in any of it.
What happens, I guess, after the acknowledgement? Because okay, cool, you can read online, this is my blind spots. Sweet, awesome, I know them, but what's the step beyond just knowing them? Where do we go with that knowledge and that information? What would you guys advise, sort of as that next step beyond just knowing?
So the first step on that is to develop an internal observer, which essentially allows you to see your behavior without judging yourself. Because the blind spot stuff contradicts who we want to be. And so that's why we're not seeing it. That's why it's called a blind spot. It's just the reverse of what we're trying so hard to be in terms of being our best selves. And so if you can, once you start to see that the other stuff exists, like for example, I'm a 2, so I want to be caring, I want to be generous, but I also have selfish parts of me. But I don't want to see that, because that hurts my image, not just with other people, but with my own self-respect. And so once I can see, yeah, you're selfish, but that's not the end of you. You're this wonderful mixture of all this stuff then I can relax and be wholly who I am, as opposed to just this persona who's trying hard to be so helpful, and everybody's going, and you see that, when people are doing their persona, you can see that they are working hard at it, and it's exhausting to do it for all of us, but it's not satisfying.
I would add that get familiar with your body. Most of us are not familiar with what the reactions are in our body. When something comes up for me that's painful and it, clenches my stomach, I do not want to put my attention there. That's uncomfortable. It's weird. It's painful. But if we can get familiar with that's where the money is. If I can just allow that to be there, allow that reaction to be there, and just sit with it, it's going to relax. It's going to relax, and eventually I can get back in the flow again. But I can't do it if I don't acknowledge it and feel it.
I love that because, like an example, I guess for me is I can really read a room in a social environment, and when someone else does something that I deem awkward or uncomfortable, I get nervous tics. Almost to the point, like if I'm watching an episode of The Office that's super awkward, and I change the channel during the awkward scene because I feel bad for them for showing up awkward in that social setting. So to me, like there's these nervous tics, but I love what you just said there because the way that I show up in that moment to choose to be like, okay, you aren't responsible for them, right? It makes me enjoy The Office more. It also makes me enjoy social settings more where I can just be present, more fully present, and show up and just, okay, we're going to experience this together. One thing that you had said in first service that I would love to talk about here for a second is you were talking about moments as a 7 where you're really excited about the next thing. You're always in the next thing. And some of what we're talking about now is showing up in the present. Would you speak to that a little bit of what you noticed happening to you, always looking in yourself, in your 7 self,
okay,
yeah.
So as a 7, the way that I handle my fear is by pretending it's not there.
Okay.
And to do that, I go up into my head and I start thinking about all these fun things that I can be doing, all the next things, next adventure, next idea, next book I want to read, next person I want to call, so on and so on. And it can go on and on and on. And in so doing, it's such a habit. I don't even know I'm doing it. I literally don't even know I'm doing it half the time. It's such a habit. I can be on a beach in Hawaii, climbing a mountain in Colorado, having a cup of coffee with a friend, but I go up into my head and I'm spinning up here and I'm not experiencing what I'm doing right now. And the way I discovered that was when I started noticing, I would think to myself, wow, when can I do this again? I want to do this again. And it occurred to me that I'm not actually doing it right now.
Yeah.
I am not present for this great mountain climb in Colorado or with my friend right here, right now. And that's why I want to do it again. And that sort of fuels that 7 type structure and why we are always wanting to do more stuff, more stuff, more stuff. Thinking that's the type saying, if you just do more, it'll be more fun and more better and more, all of it.
Yeah.
And it isn't.
So Leslie is talking about the head types 5, 6, and 7. So that's one center of intelligence. Then we have, for thus 2s, 3s, and 4s, we rely on our emotions to decide things. And then 8, 9s, and 1s rely on their gut instinct. You'll hear people say that, but that's really real. And there really are 3 separate bases of intelligence, and you really need all 3 to make a good decision. So for example, 6 months ago, we were in this business relationship with a group across the country, and as a heart type, as a 2, I just didn't like this businesswoman. I didn't like her, and she was, she violated a lot of my expectations, and so I was like, I'm not going to deal with her, and so that's from a heart position, because that's a relationship call. I don't like her. I don't want to be in a relationship with her. That's just an emotional take on it. So Leslie, fortunately, is a head type. And she reminded me, Rick, you don't have to date her. You don't have to sleep with her. You don't have to marry her. All you have to do is have a business relationship with her. And that really calmed me down. It was like, oh, okay, we're good, okay.
That's a good example. So, okay, wait. So we covered head and heart. What? Speak to the other type real fast.
Okay. So 8, 9, and 1s are called body types. And the intelligence there has to do with taking a stand on things, feeling worthy, making a decision and acting on it. Those are gifts for their type. And the blind, do you want the blind spot for them? So the blind spot for the 8 is they love life so much, they want to just do it. And so they're action junkies. And they just take action before they think. It's ready, fire, aim. And then we've already talked about 9. Kelly's been beaten up forever here. So, but they are wonderful, wonderful presences. They don't judge. And so people are drawn to 9s. They're a wonderful presence in the universe. And as I said before, they neglect themselves. And then the 1s are also terrific because they're such great planners. They're conscientious. They're dedicated. But the dilemma with 1s is that they are constantly thinking that they have to improve and they have to improve the world. And it turns out the rest of us they don't care about that so much. And so they are getting upset and annoyed because the rest of us aren't keeping up. And they can't rely on us to have that kind of go ahead, fix it kind of energy. And so they're generally ticked, they're angry. They don't see it, but they are angry about people are not doing their part.
Awesome. Okay, well, we got to start to wrap this up. But I want to ask one question for all my single friends in the room that I heard is a common question. If, let's say you're a 6, okay? Is there a perfect type that person should be looking for to marry and to, is your life going to be perfect if you find the perfect partner number? Is that a thing?
There are no 2 types that are perfect together.
There we go.
Our answer is if you're both conscious, you're both willing to look at your own stuff, own your own stuff, and communicate, you can work through.
Key is being conscious.
So there's marriages in here that are maybe I just married the wrong number. You're not off the hook. Just do the hard work. Okay. Let's do this. If people want to stay connected with you guys, what's an easy way to do that?
Our website is enneagramcentraltexas.com.
Awesome.
We have all our information there.
Cool. Well, can we do this? Can we give them a huge round of applause? Thank you guys so much for being here this morning. Love it. Yep. I love conversations like this one that we just had with Rick and Leslie because I think it's really important that we would choose to do the hard work. I think sometimes, I've been in church my whole life, so I'm saying this from experience, we can sing the worship song, we can talk about it even in a small group and say, man, grace covers it, brother. And then we walk out and we don't do the hard work of actually what's going on inside of us. And so the invitation of the Just Mind Type series is not that we would just spend a month in 2019 talking about this high-level view of the Enneagram. My prayer for you, if you're sitting in the room this morning, is that you would make a decision that today is not the end of the conversation, but instead it's a starting line. That you're going to do the hard work of soul exploration and you're going to live open-handed with your life and you're going to say, God, whatever you want to do in and through me, I know you wired me the way I am with intentionality, so I want to show up in the world as my full self. I want to have a level of awareness to my blind spots and the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, and I don't want to live with my ears plugged and my eyes closed and my fists clenched, right? I just got to do it in my own power and my own strength. But I think there's actually a better way to show up, and it's to admit some of that weakness. I've been drawn to this story in the Old Testament over the last several months. It's the story of Moses. And if you look at Moses' life, I think there's really 3 sort of distinct seasons in his life. You have 0 to 40 is his sort of Egypt years. Moses grows up thinking he's Egyptian royalty when in reality he was born actually a slave, an Israelite slave. He should have been killed at birth, but he's kind of rescued by the Pharaoh's daughters and he's brought into the palace. And 0 to 40, life is awesome. He has an identity crisis at 40 when he realizes, man, this isn't who I actually am. And it gets to him to the point where he's going, man, I should be out there actually as a slave to the Egyptians. It's putting mind games in his head. And so there's one day where he sees an Egyptian slave driver beating this Israelite slave, and he actually goes out there and he kills the Egyptian slave driver, and then he runs for his life to the back side of nowhere, to this desert. And for 40 years, Moses watches sheep. And I think about this story because then there's this moment in Moses' life at 80 years old where God encounters Moses at this burning bush. There's this burning bush moment, and I've been obsessed with this moment because in this exchange that Moses has with God, there's these two excuses that Moses gives that I feel like impact me on the daily, and I would venture to guess they are playing in your mind sometimes too. God tells him, I'm sending you back to Egypt to set my people free. I'm putting your life on a new course. I'm giving you mission. I'm giving you vision. I'm giving you this new future. I want you to go out and set my people free. And Moses responds with two excuses. The first one is, who am I? Who am I, God, that you would send me? And the second excuse is, what if they? What if they don't believe me? What if they don't think that I am actually sent by God? What if they don't think that I'm actually going to be able to set them free? What if they don't believe God's actually on my side? What if the mind games play in Moses' head? And thousands of years removed from that text and that story, I wonder if the same things play in your mind today and keep you from being and showing up in the world at your top capacity. You go, who am I? And we don't even do the soul deep work, right? We just kind of do what Moses did and we run as fast as we can away from maybe mission and calling because it seems harder to show up as our full self there. And then we use the excuse of what if they? What if they respond poorly as I choose to step up and be my full self? What if they choose to not do the hard work of soul exploration? What if in your marriage you do the hard work and your spouse doesn't, and we play the mind games and we give excuse as to why we won't show up a certain way in the world? Who am I and what if they? And I wonder if today would be maybe a burning bush moment for you. Where you go, I'm not going to keep plugging my ears and closing my eyes and acting like what's happening over there isn't happening, but instead I'm going to choose to say, okay, God, here's my simple yes. I'm going to live open-handed in the world. And where you lead, I'm going to follow, and I'm going to show up as my full self. I'm going to do the hard work of soul exploration so I can show up as my best self. And that's the invitation this morning. I love the words of Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 and 10. He says this. At first I didn't think of it as a gift, and I begged God to remove it. 3 times I did that. And then he told me, my grace is enough. It's all you need. My strength comes into its own in your weakness. That's what God says to you this morning. Once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. I quit focusing on the handicap, and I began appreciating the gift. It was a case of Christ's strength moving in on my weakness. Now I take limitations in stride and with good cheer. These limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition, bad breaks, I just let Christ take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become. I don't care if it's the Enneagram or another tool or another resource, but I beg you, as Icon Church, would we be a people who are marked by humility, that we live open-handed and we go in our brokenness, in what sometimes feels like our shadow side and our blind spots, we'll show up in the world as best as we possibly can. Hear it from people who've been on this journey for 20 plus years. You keep learning, you keep digging. But I love that Jesus was humble. And I pray that we would be a people who would show up in the world with humility. Say, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm willing to show up as I best possibly can today. Are you with me? Let's pray.